Such a pleasure to be back here at URI, at the Bay Campus. I used to live just down the beach in Bonnet Shores, and it's just such a pleasure to be back here and to share a bit of time with those of you from the aspiring journalist world. And I hope you guys are having a great time. I can imagine how interesting and excited it would be to learn about coastal dynamics and climate change and all those great things that you're learning this week, if only the weather were cooperating a little bit better. But I'd also like to thank Sunshine and the Metcalf Institute for the inspiration and for the wisdom of reaching out to journalists and by extension to all of us as a society on such critically important issues. This is a terrific institute. The university is very, very fortunate to have it located here. And again, I really appreciate the invitation and Catherine's help to get here. And I know that my wife Debbie, who's with me, and I are going to enjoy our stay in New England for this weekend. So with that, and at the risk of actually getting serious, which heaven help me, don't let me do too much of, to start throwing things, whatever it takes. But I'd like to talk with you about something that, as Dennis mentioned and as Sunshine was alluding to, does combine this scientific effort that many of the people here at GSO obviously are very concerned about, and that you as aspiring journalists and as professionals are learning about, and how that connects up, for better or worse, with the public policy process and with politics in particular. It's an interesting story. The Heinz Center, as Dennis mentioned, has an illustrious history of involvement in issues related to environment, with a particular focus on bringing people from the four key sectors that John Heinz, as a senator from Pennsylvania, had identified as key to resolving environmental battles. He unfortunately died too young, early in the 1990s in a plane crash, and was unable to fulfill his vision. But his wife, Teresa Heinz, carried forward a discussion that they actually had 2 days before he perished about how he wanted to see a process develop, bring these people together, resolve the issues that would be coming down the pike before people had fallen off to their respective poles and were intractable in their positions. And Heinz Center has a history of working on these coastal issues, particularly thinking about human risks and the costs of these disasters that befall us. Ceres, as Dennis was alluding to, is a terrific partner. And they have a particular focus on injecting this sense of sustainability and certainly the message of climate change into the investment community, and they are indeed a network of institutional investors. I think we're up to about $7 trillion worth of assets under management. That might be considerably smaller now. But at any rate, also then working in conjunction with environmental organizations to do their good work. So obviously a good partnership for looking at this blueprint. For the journalists, you have copies of the Resilient Coast Blueprint. The most important page in that document actually is probably the second page. Looks like this, and I've got extra copies that I'll just pass around for you to share with your neighbors. And this is a page that has the logos of the endorsers of this particular product. What we wanted to do was to bring a broad group of people together of very different perspectives on the issues of coastal risk and the implications of climate change. Why? Well, for the same reason that any of us are interested in this topic. As you can see here, there are some severe implications for the kind of sea level rise that we do anticipate, in which the science is telling us may not be so far away as we had once imagined, particularly for significant portions of the East Coast, which are not only suffering from rising seas, but from falling land. In other words, they're subsiding. But here's a real driver, again, getting back to a point that Dennis was talking about the implications of these disasters on our health economically. And obviously, to the extent that we're paying costs and incurring losses for these things, there is this very important social dimension to this as well. But as you can see here, for a period from 1950 through 2005, it's very obvious that something significant is going on here. in terms of the costs associated with weather disasters around the world. And this trend is obviously continuing on. We had Ike and Gustav last year, but the key thing here to note is that this curve that's rising is rising at about 6 to 7% per year. And Risk Management Solutions, which is a catastrophe modeling firm, they advise underwriters and insurance companies about what the various elements of threat are and how to price insurance premiums, has estimated that about a third of this trend, so about 2% per year, can be attributed to climate change. To me, the more important thing is, okay, what accounts for the other 2/3? This just gives you a little bit of the same kind of information, a little bit updated through 2008, and obviously you can see a peak of events. But this is accounting for billion-dollar loss events. It's just striking to me that in the U.S. alone that we're talking about on the order of close to 10 of those a year. Now the cumulative damages, if you look off to the right, are getting astronomical in some cases. With the Katrina year up close to about $175 billion in that single year. And where are we at risk? And this should be no surprise to many of you. I know, for example, we have an esteemed person here from Key West. But whether you're from Florida or Texas, it's probably no surprise that you are a state at risk for these huge disasters. And that we are, as a nation, extremely brittle and very vulnerable to these kinds of impacts. I would just note that for those of you who already live here, or those who don't yet, this is looking like a pretty good place to be, at least according to this map. And just to reinforce the point, these losses are not so much attributable to climate change. As time goes on, they will be. But the real issue here are the decisions that we're making as a society. Where we choose to grow, where we choose to invest, where we choose to live and work, and where we obviously choose to spend money. We have about $9 trillion of insured property at risk in coastal areas along the Gulf and Atlantic coasts. And just to give you another sense of this story, if Hurricane Andrew had hit 10 years later, the losses attributed to that storm would have been double. And obviously, this is a trend that continues. It's one that we've been watching happen over a long period of time. We're doubling our losses basically every 10 years and have been since the 60s. So this, again, probably not so much of a surprise, but we are extremely vulnerable in coastal areas. Here, again, good place to be, as it would seem from this map. But as you get further down to our neck of the woods in DC, for example, you're into some high-risk territory for a number of reasons. Rising sea level is certainly a part of it, and this is a vulnerability to sea level rise map. But shorelines are also receding, what's the term? I've already used it and I forget it. But anyway, the land is slowly sinking as the water is slowly rising, and so we're extremely vulnerable. If you continue this map around the Gulf side, that vulnerability would continue. And then just to drive this point home somewhat more specifically, with 4 meters of sea level rise, basically the southern third of Florida disappeared, which just happens to include Miami-Dade. But the other thing that I take away in the message that's equally resonant here is that 4 meters of water is not all that uncommon with a storm surge associated with kinds of Florida hurricanes that we'll be looking at. So obviously great potential for harm damage, and there's something very unsustainable about development in that part of the world.